What is one thing most people get wrong about the D-Day landings?
I think the focus is always on the first day and not that it is the first of a eventually 77-day campaign. So I think people kind of close the book at the end of June the 6th and go, oh, we're done then, and so it's not so much that thinking wrongly about June the 6th. It's not accepting it's part of something bigger.
Yeah, and why do people forget about the other 76 days leading to Berlin?
There's a couple of reasons. One is that the media shows the first day. So the video games, the Call of Duty, the Medal of Honor, Saving Private Ryan, all those kind of things, they hone in on that. But I think it's also because D-Day is much easier to understand if you wrap it all up in a nice, neat box, which would be the Germans control the beaches in the morning and the Allies control the beaches at the end of the day, and mission done, mission accomplished, beachhead established, Eisenhower's happy, job done. Whereas when you get into the successive days, the plan the Allies had falls apart a little bit. The Germans start having a say. The weather comes into play. Leadership is questioned. Some commanders are better than others. And it gets muddy and murky, and you have to kind of admit there's fault. So if you just focus on D-Day, it's a nice, neat ending.
And could you give a bit of an overview for someone that's maybe not studied the first day and beyond, for those of you who are listening that are new to D-Day?
Well, so the first day was the establishment of a beachhead, the so-called second front, although it's arguably the third front or the fourth front, depending on how you count your fronts. Is the Mediterranean a front, in which case we've already been fighting there. The Eastern Front obviously been fighting there since 1941 and Barbarossa, so that's a bit vague. But the establishment of the beachhead, it's the operation that had the most planning, essentially. I mean, they've pretty much start to think about getting back to France the minute after they've been beaten out of France in Dunkirk in 1940. The understanding that if we're going to defeat the Nazis, we'll have to go through France and drive to Germany. It's the most direct route. And then the planning for Overlord really commences properly sort of 42 and 43. And by 44, it's very, very on its way. And essentially it worked, because if you put that much planning into something, it's likely to work. And one of the interesting things that I think people forget is that amphibious landings do always tend to work. They can be costly. And you take some of the Pacific landings like Tarawa and Peleliu, incredibly costly. But really, the number of times an invading force has been beaten off a beach, the history doesn't have many of those. And essentially, the Allies have stacked the decks. And I mean that literally and figuratively. There are literally 156,000 men aboard the 5,000 ships that are in the channel. But we've stacked the decks in terms of intelligence, the understanding of the German defenses, the road network, the work of SOE and OSS and resistance, the bombardments, the transportation plan, the fact that we can understand the German movements because of the Bletchley Code breaking going on. And the chances of D-Day failing, despite what some people say these days, are very low, very low. So many things would have to go right for the Germans, and so many things would have to go wrong for the Allies, that it's pretty much statistically impossible, I believe. But that doesn't mean there isn't death, because, of course, if you're running out of a landing craft, a defended beach, that first wave is going to usually take casualties. The bigger question is whether the casualties sustained are acceptable within the grand plan that the planners have. And essentially, for D-Day, the 5,000 or so that were killed within the first 24 hours to 36 hours was comfortably acceptable. Not to the parents, not to the husbands, but it was within the grand scheme of things. When another 1.5 million men are going to be coming in over the next few weeks and months, that kind of loss rate is acceptable for the high stakes of D-Day. And then, to answer the next part of your question about the next day, basically the Normandy campaign divides into three parts. There's that establishing of the beachhead, more or less end of June the 6th, that's over. There's a little bit more sort of squeezing out of the next 2 or 3 days and advancing inland. Then the next phase is the attritional phase, where both sides kind of get a bit stuck and they're both waiting to bring up their reinforcements, and the Allies are waiting to establish more airfields in France. The Germans are waiting to get their armored divisions to Normandy, which is problematic for them because the Allies control the sky. So therefore, moving armored divisions in the daytime, they just get hit by Allied fighter bombers. So they have to move at night. So that takes time, et cetera, et cetera. And exactly when the attritional phase starts, no one's got it. It's not like a certain minute on a certain day, because D-Day starts at H hour. There's an absolute, you can read your watch of when D-Day commences. But the attritional phase, it sort of morphs into an attritional phase. And then towards the end of July, it morphs out of the attritional phase into the breakout phase, which are the various operations like Cobra and Bluecoat, which are, by now, the Allies have enough people to essentially do another D-Day. In the Allied plan is, when they break out, it must be to such an extent of success that there's no doubt of failure. When we do it, we will do it with such a massive, great blow the Germans can't stop it. So those are the kind of the 3 phases. And then even the end of the Battle of Normandy, we don't know, because it depends how you define it. I personally, because I think it's a convenient chapter break, think the liberation of Paris is a good way to kind of break. Well, after that, it's a different chapter. But that's August the 24th. But they're still fighting in Normandy, in the region of Normandy, in the Le Havre area, till September.
Wow.
So the Battle of Normandy can be defined by various metrics depending on where you draw your lines in the sand. And indeed, there are, if you kind of move into Brittany, which isn't Normandy, but it's the next one down, there are certain strongholds on the Channel ports there that hold out till the end of 1940, end of spring 1945, May 45.
Wow.
As there are Channel ports up there that are still fighting months afterwards. So when you've been doing it as long as I have, you realize that giving things labels and, we all know when the Premier League starts, and we all know when it finishes. There's the last game, and this team have been crowned champions. But something as fluid as a campaign through multiple countries, labeling it and having cutoffs. And, if you were to ask me how many people died in the Battle of Normandy, I would have to say back to you, and your criteria for the Battle of Normandy is what? Because, for example, how far out to sea is someone killed on a naval vessel? Does that count as Normandy? And at what point does it become the wider Battle of the Atlantic?
Yeah.
Clearly within a couple of miles of the beach. Well, I guess that's still Normandy, but 20 miles away? If a ship was sunk 30 miles off the coast of Cherbourg, is that Normandy now? When does it start? When does the Battle of Normandy start? I mean, I said D-Day starts, but the bombing of it began earlier. There are commando raids, beach missions, and things like that going back to 42. Is that the beginning of the Normandy campaign? You could argue that it is, but you could also argue that it isn't. It's all about presenting your vision but before you do so, defining your parameters, if that makes sense.
Yeah. There's a hell of a lot of nuances when it comes to
Absolutely.
such a dynamic and fluid campaign at such a large scale, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's it. Nuance. And the thing is, and I'm not going to play that middle-aged playbook of young people don't understand nuance, because it clearly isn't the case. But we have moved into an era where people don't necessarily want to invest the time to understand something properly, when a single soundbite or a single TikTok or something can appear to sum it up very quickly. Well, that'll do for me. Yeah, that's read a whole book? How many pages? 600. Then read another book with a different. I haven't. No. Tell me now. Tell me how many people died now. So that it's not a young people thing. It's a societal thing that we have this need for everything to be instantaneous and definitive. Just if we're on we're on a flight or something, and the Wi-Fi that we're getting given on an aircraft isn't coming in immediately. Well, why isn't it there? For goodness sake, we didn't do any of this stuff 30 years ago. So We should move away from wanting everything wrapped up neatly, which brings us back to what you said about D-Day. D-Day you can wrap up neatly. The Battle of Normandy is much more complex.
Yeah, there's always such this desire for a black and white answer,
Yeah.
and you're right about like the TikTokification
Oh,
of
good word. Yeah.
so of social media, where we want that black and white summary. But what I'm starting to notice is, like we were saying about the nuance thing, is a lot of the time it's never normally black and white, and it's never normally one side or the other. It's normally somewhere in the middle is where the wisdom tends to be. But can we go back before the D-Day landings quickly and just go run through how the plan actually began, who was involved, and what were some of the alternative ideas or maybe the decoy ideas? 'Cause I'd love to
Yeah,
explore
sure.
some of those.
Um, so the real heroes that we don't talk about are just the hundreds of staff workers, the
Mm,
people who just start compiling data. And that begins really very early. One of the ridiculous things that worked was that appeal the British government put out for holiday snaps of foreign countries. And that's an era when not that many Brits went overseas. It's not like, your package holidays to Ibiza and things like that. But people sent in their holiday snaps, many of which were just Uncle Fred sitting on a donkey wherever. But within those photos were photos of various coastal towns in France and Belgium and Netherlands and Norway. And the Allies or the British got so many tens of thousands, they reckon they almost had, if you stitched them all together, an entire a representation photographically of the coast of Northwest Europe as it was just before the
wow.
war. And then you add on that the millions, and it is millions of aerial photos taken on, and the assessment of that and the analysis of that is what's being built there, so all these thousands of people are just building up data. And then the key guy is General Frederick Morgan, who people have forgotten because he's basically a planning guy, and he's the one who starts looking at how many people will we need to invade? How many defenders will there be there? And of course, it's never in a fixed position because the information is changing as each week passes in 43, and another Allied division arrives in England from the USA or Canada, essentially.
Mm,
And the number of Germans in Normandy is changing, and the number of Germans in Norway and the Netherlands is changing. So poor old people like Frederick Morgan, that as soon as he gets an iteration of the plan, it's already out of date. And then the key moment is when General Montgomery, coming back from North Africa, because Morgan had anticipated three or had suggested three landing beaches. And it obviously eventually becomes five. And that's basically Montgomery saying, yeah, three is not enough,
mm,
and probably five isn't enough. Ideally, we'd have seven. And if we could have nine, we'd have nine. I mean, essentially, the Allies would like to maximize everything because numbers works.
mm,
We could get into this later on, but this idea of, is this tank the Germans have better than this? Is this tank that the British and Americans have better? Isn't really the argument. The argument is, but how many of these tanks
yeah.
can we get into the field, and how repairable will they be, and
Mm,
how can we resupply them, and how easy are they to learn how to use, et cetera, et cetera. So Morgan sort of hands over the reins to Montgomery, then it becomes five beaches. And then the next big thing is when Eisenhower is appointed supreme commander. But a lot of things that, blogs and TikToks and Twitters and Facebook's things will say that he planned D-Day. He oversaw D-Day, but the planning had pretty much been done. He did a little bit of tweaking because that's part of any commander, any new CEO
yeah, yeah.
is going to come in and listen to the PowerPoint presentation and go, "Yeah, that's very good, but we should do this because it's making sure that you're conveying your input." So there are tweaks being made,
Mm,
but all the time, the actual planning of the invasion is being done. There's this idea of making sure the Germans don't find out what we're doing,
mm,
because all this success that I talked about a few minutes ago on June the 6th was largely due to the fact that the Allies had what we call complete tactical surprise on that morning. And although it seems a bit too good to be true, when the Germans in the various positions on the beaches looked through the fog and the fog cleared and they saw these thousands of ships, it was a complete surprise to them. They knew it was coming somewhere. They knew it was coming at some point, but they had predicted the Germans it was going to come at a period of high tide. When it came at a period of low tide, they'd been predicting different part of the coast, and so it was tactical surprise. So the Allies have to put together the deception campaign, which is sort of in two parts, because there's the keeping it secret bit, the bodyguard of lies, Churchill called it. We have to protect the real truth with a bodyguard of lies. One of Churchill's really quick, easy to understand, brilliant quotes. And then the bodyguard is then assisted by a deception campaign. So we must convince the Germans that we're landing not where we're going to land. And the two big options are the Normandy or the Pas de Calais near Calais and Boulogne, which is historically where most crossings of militaries had done, going back to Romans. It's the narrowest part of the channel. It's direct route to London if you're going that way, and it's kind of direct route to Germany and a Ruhr if you're going the other way. And the Allies kind of know it's the best plan. And I would make the argument that the biggest reason we chose not to go to Calais is because the Germans, and this is where we're starting to venture into national stereotypes, but it's more about how the German military and the intelligence works, is that it's easier to persuade someone something if they want to believe it already, right?
Confirmation bias.
Yeah. So the Germans would, we thought, and it's largely born to be true, would think, well, they must, the logic states they'll be going to Calais. That's where I would go, is what they're kind of saying, because it's close. You know, Normandy's not the most direct route to Germany by far. The channel is 85 miles of channel compared to 26 miles of channel. It's all those variables there. But the way I describe it is the Germans' intelligence, the Abwehr, have like two big whiteboards in their office of Pas de Calais and Normandy. There's some little whiteboards of Norway and the Netherlands as well, just as possibilities, but they're not really taking them serious. And every bit of information they get that suggests it's Calais, someone goes up with a dry marker and puts a tick on that board. And we need them to keep putting ticks in the Pas de Calais board. And we do. And that can mean something as very simple as if you fly a reconnaissance aircraft over Normandy taking photos, make sure you fly 3 over the Calais area taking photos, even if there actually isn't any film in the camera. The idea being, some German bod walking on the coast will go, that is a reconnaissance aircraft. I recognize that by I'll stop doing the terrible German. We'll see the bright blue of the aerial reconnaissance and tell his sergeant, I saw a reconnaissance aircraft today. But the guy in Calais will have seen 3.
Yeah.
And then you add all the inflatable tanks and the replica landing craft that the Allies or the planners put in the east coast of England, so the East Anglia and Kent, of FUSAG, which is First U.S. Army Group, which didn't exist. It was simply a paper organization commanded by General Patton, which was one of Eisenhower's most genius moves, in that, and we're going down a bit of a tangent here, Patton had been a bit of a naughty boy and slapped a couple of people in Sicily. He was very outspoken about the Brits and the Russians and basically everybody, and could be very good at what he did, but they, couldn't keep his mouth shut. So he had to be admonished some way for a bit, but he's also can be a very useful commander and aggressive. So Eisenhower has to somehow reprimand him for what he'd been doing in 43. And the best way was to give him a job that was very important, but actually isn't what Patton would want to be. Look, you are going to be commanding, and Patton's face, if you'd been at the meeting when you're going to be in command of FUSAG, the first U.S. Army Group, Patton would have been, brilliant, that sounds amazing. What's that? Well, it doesn't exist. Said I. No, it's just fake radio traffic and inflatable tanks. But we can then feed the information to the Germans, little by little, double agents, blah, blah, blah. The Patton is heading this organization. And then when it doesn't land in Calais and the actual invasion comes into Normandy, it's worked. And in fact, it works so well, even weeks later, even weeks after June the 6th, German intelligence are still believing that there's another invasion coming in Calais and that the one in Normandy that's actually now underway is still only a diversion. So it works so well. But that's partly because, again, another rabbit hole is that the Germans have far less of a tail to their military than the Allies do, in that like 70% of German troops are kind of directly involved in combat. The point of the spear is very, very big. Whereas the Allies, we have huge amounts of reserve, by which I mean the mechanics, the engineers, the
Mm,
guys who build railway battalions. I mean, the Americans have something like 60,000 men in railway battalions in Normandy. So this is just old steam engines, often brought from America directly to Normandy to just have engineers establish railway lines to just keep pumping ammunition and food and stuff
mm,
up towards the front lines. The
mm,
Germans can't dream by 44 of having that amount of men doing stuff. So when the Germans aren't idiots. They know how many millions of Allied soldiers there are in the UK. They assume, well, therefore, 70% of that must be infantry divisions and tank divisions. Because it's the Allies, maybe only 10% is armored divisions, infantry divisions. The rest of it is this supply that is what makes the Allied army so efficient. So the D-Day operation is maxing out what the Allies have the ability to do, really, in June 44. But the Germans think it's tiny. It's bizarre. It's a bizarre setup, but it's just about how different people seeing the same thing from alternate points of view, which means they've misunderstood. So the deception plan, the information, all that added together, add in pattern, add in inflatable tanks, all that kind of stuff there meant that there is this tactical surprise on the morning of D-Day, which is why it worked. Well, one of the first reason why it worked.
mm. And is the reason why the Germans didn't had such a large spearhead but didn't have many reserves, is that also because of Barbarossa and them being strained on the Eastern Front?
Yeah.
Wait, hold that thought. I'm genuinely so grateful that you've stuck around with us to listen to these fascinating insights from the guest so far. If this episode has given you one piece of knowledge which has helped you understand yourself and the world a little bit better than before, the absolute best way to support us is to pay it forward and hit the share button right now. Don't let this knowledge stay hidden. Please send it to one person who will benefit from this episode. Thank you so much. Let's dive back into the rest of the episode.
It's everything. It's partly the. I mean, it gets complicated, but the blitzkrieg idea of how efficient the Germans were in 1940 is a bit of a red herring. It's they were they it wasn't as new as some people say it was, that type of warfare. You know, you can go back to the other periods of, Zulus or something, of advancing fast and doing stuff, and but it was a bit of a paper thin facade that kind of got away. It papered over the limitations of it, blitzkrieg, which gives them the confidence to then invade Yugoslavia and everywhere else, and then Barbarossa. And Barbarossa, for my money, is the single of many big mistakes Hitler made in World War II. That has to be up there.
Mm.
And it stretched their resources and their logistics. I mean, the Germans invade Russia, or the Soviet Union, I should correctly say, with something like 600 different truck manufacturers providing
Yeah.
vehicles.
Yeah.
And it's just stupid, And then the weather comes in and the mud and everything else. And meanwhile, the Allies, the thing about our perception of the war is even that we realize now, even in the first couple of years when the Allies are on the back foot, they are losing the war. They're losing the battles, but they're winning the bigger war because they're churning out pilots in Canada. They're churning out bombers. They're churning out this, that, and the other. And it will take a long time for the results of that to really come through.
Mm.
But when they do come through, that's what the Allies have to rely on. The Germans have basically, squandered their resources early in the war, and can never get anywhere near to catching up to have the ability to do anything particular. They have to just be reactive after about
Mm.
1943. They can't really do much else. And the Luftwaffe has been pretty much destroyed. The Husky and Sicily and the first parts of Italy is probably where, and on the Eastern Front,
Mm.
where they haven't, got an aircraft force left substantially by 44. Which is again the question of exactly at what point do the Germans know that they're toast? I mean, certainly by early 43, there's no way they can win. But I would argue 42 is the critical year. In 42, they're they may be starting most areas with some sort of head of steam and advantage, but they're losing that. They're ending that year having been pushed back pretty much everywhere. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So yeah, the German tail is everything about the German structure is just falling apart by 44, and yet still they managed to fight on for another year because that's what ideological desire can do. They have that ability to keep people fighting because they've given them this stupid bullshit idea of fighting for a cause, which actually is worth something. Whereas the Allied soldier, to some extent, would rather be at home taking his girlfriend to the movie, whereas some of the Germans, the SS and the Waffen, they're actually more ideologically prepared to die for their cause. Well, the Allied soldier doesn't want to die for the cause.
Mm.
He wants to get it done, but if he can do it and come back home, that's the way to do it. Hence the whole steel before flesh policy that is probably Montgomery's biggest um, addition to the way that the Allies fight the war, is that we'd rather go a little bit slower,
Mm.
but use steel and use these resources we've spent the last 4 years building up than just rush in through the gates in a headlong video game, do or die. I've got to have my dinner soon. I might as well attack everything now kind of approach.
Mm.
Um, so yeah.
So is it almost this attritional, slower build up and approach of the Allies? So, like you're saying, they're building up their resources. I think, am I correct in saying in the Battle of Britain as well, we started off with less aircraft, but by the end of it, we had more, and that helped
Yeah.
us win as well. So that's another example of
Yeah.
that, whereas the Germans were just all horses out at the same time, just pierce through as quickly as possible, but then didn't necessarily have as much backbone. Is that what was the
Yeah.
fundamental reason why?
Yeah. If you look at the origins of the people who were writing the stuff the Germans were following, going back to the Swift plan in First World War and all those kind of things like that, it's about, we can do this, but it must be swift.
Mm.
And the Japanese, it has to be said, have a very similar thing,
Yeah.
is that speed, 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 let's get all this. And they haven't necessarily thought about what they're going to do once they've got it. So the Germans are neither in the First World War or in the Second World War were ever prepared for a long, long drawn out war. And it makes absolute sense. How on earth can Germany, one country, to churn out enough stuff to compete with the UK and Canada and the USA, Australia, New Zealand, Rhodesia, South Africa, et cetera, India, and all these other West Africa, East Africa, that are all contributing to this war effort? I don't just mean, bullets and tanks. I mean grain and oil and rubber and all those things there. And so, yeah, it's easier to say the Allies were slow, but then slow has a negative connotation.
Yeah.
I would suggest methodical.
Patient.
Cautious isn't even the right word. It's playing. The Allies are trying to dictate the pace.
Yeah.
You could use that kind of football analogy of a team that sits back and lets the other team attack. And then they do they want to control the tempo of the game, and the pundits will say, "Oh well, right now, Man City are dictating the play, and whoever the other team is, they can't get a foot in." The Allies, they have the ability now, they have the strength now to try and keep controlling the tempo, make sure that the Germans are always having to react to what the Allies are doing, and even if we're not moving, the Allies are still putting pressure on. Even if the front isn't moving on the ground, the strategic bombing is carrying on, for example, and often both. And so the Allies were in that position. They were in that position at the beginning of the war where they can't do. If they put resources into battle A, battle B has less.
Mm.
But they're getting to the point now where they can do battle A, battle B, and battle C, and even keep enough in reserve for battle D, which is an opportunist one in case something turns up. Actually, well, let's just head off towards there because there's a gap in the line. the Germans barely have enough for for reacting to one plan. And interestingly, we're in this era now, and your age group of people looking at World War II are not burdened, I think, by the dark days of the 1980s into the 90s of everybody, the historians writing about how efficient the Germans were, and look at how big their tanks are, look at the size of the guns, and the British were slow in Italy, and the British were slow in Normandy, and the Canadians didn't do this, and the Americans didn't do this. And we're out of that era now. We're much more into the acknowledging that the Allies, the Normandy campaign at 77 days, if you sell it the wrong way, as historians did then, it's, oh, how slow, how ponderous they were. But the planning, when Montgomery and others and Bradley were sort of suggesting how it might go, we're going back to the March 44. And they really hadn't, they could only have vague ideas, because you can't think about exactly which city you'll have got to 2.5 months later. It's but the suggestion was it would take 90 days, the Normandy campaign. So we came under by 2 weeks, and the total of deaths and missing in action was under what had been projected. So it's the opposite of slow. It's actually quite fast. And what's more, the Allies have smashed a couple of German armies in Normandy. It's not just about gains on the ground. It's about winning the attritional war. It's about making sure that when you've moved on, you've smashed the German army in front of you. And essentially, going back to the complications of the 77-day campaign, is the Allies are faced with which is their priority. Is it liberating peoples? That's option one. Is it covering ground and getting as much of that under our belt and behind us as possible? Or is it destroying the German armies that are ahead of us? And mostly, the Allies are going for three. I mean, famously, Eisenhower and Bradley did not want to get embroiled into going into Paris.
Really?
Despite the symbolism of liberating the City of Light and all that kind of stuff there, partly because they knew there'd be a humanitarian crisis. The Allied planners were, well, I'm going off on a massive, great tangent.
No, keep going.
Is that people have forgotten how desperate the situation was in Paris. I don't mean rural France. I mean, where I am in Normandy, there's still food because it's farming, and the Germans weren't stopping farming. In fact, they're increasing farming because they need their troops to be fed. So it almost is a surfeit of produce in the summer of 44, because the Germans have now gone, beaten. There's now all this, extra fields of carrots, if you like. But Paris, being a city, I mean, I'm being facetious, but they've eaten the dogs, they've eaten the cats. The budgerigars have been in the Sunday roast by now, and the Allies have enough stuff to defeat the Germans. But moving into Paris and then dealing with the hundreds of thousands of civilians that would need feeding was not really what they wanted to do. Bradley said something about Paris to me is just a name on a map. I don't, it's not on the route I want to go, but eventually, because they are the Allies, because we are the side of good, we go, well, we can't really leave them, can we? Yeah. And General Leclerc's French Second Armored Division hammers out of the Falaise Gap towards Paris, and along with the Spanish battalion of the French, they liberate Paris. And I mean, in the end, and this is another thing the Allies are good at, is because they've ended up going to Paris, it wasn't quite what they wanted to. It does open up the rail network, because everything in France goes through Paris. And they go, well, we've got it now. So they build lots of airfields around Paris that really helps out for strategic bombing later on. So they're very good, the Allies, of kind of, taking something that isn't their first option and go, yeah, but I suppose now we've done this, let's turn a decision we didn't want to make into a positive, which is why, because Eisenhower's never going to admit after the war, you know what, lads, didn't really care about Paris, because it doesn't sound very good. Especially when you're trying to be a president later on. So, and there are photos of Eisenhower in Paris and what have you. So they made a publicity stunt of a decision they didn't really want to. I'm not knocking Eisenhower. I think he's an incredible commander, but well, going back to these three options, you said that far better was to make sure that wherever you move and whenever you move, you smash the German army behind you. That's the thing. And although we hadn't smashed all of it, hence why Market Garden doesn't go quite to plan, and hence why the Germans have enough to do the Battle of the Bulge, the
Yeah.
offensive in December 44. But that's the Battle of the Bulge is the last throw of the Germans know that if that doesn't work, that's it, they're toast again. Whereas the Allies can do, I mean, the Allies can absorb what is a tactical disaster of the Hurtgen Forest in October, November 44, which no one comes out of well. None of the Allied commanders there come out well at all. It's a meat grind. I've walked those hills and valleys of that part of near Aachen in Germany. It's just awful
Mm.
that they can still absorb the losses and react dynamically to the Ardennes a few days later, effectively. Whereas the Germans, if the Bulge offensive doesn't go, and it's never going to work, it's a ridiculous plan. Let's get to Antwerp and drive a wedge between the It's never going to work. But they know that when it doesn't work, that's it. Although actually they're doing a similar one at the same time around Budapest in Hungary, because of their own resources, Hungary is one of the last places where the Germans can get synthetic fuel, which is all they can have, and they don't need Hungary. But although, because for the Red Army to go via Hungary, it ends up meaning going via Austria to get to Germany. So it's not the most direct way. When by this point the Russians have done, or the Soviets have done, Operation Bagration, which is basically coming straight due west towards Berlin, which is going to bring the war going via. And they've had Romania's changed sides, and it gets all complicated. But it's an option for the Red Army, and again, they've got plenty of people by this point to do that. So the Germans are spending all their efforts to try and defend Budapest, which is not going to change the tactical outcome of the war, and do the Battle of the Bulge. And also, if I may continue, they're doubling down on their insistence of murdering the people that they don't like, which is just insane. An example of their stupidity. And I think it's July. It might be late June. I think it's July. It might even be early August. A trainload of wounded German non-commissioned officers, so corporals and sergeants, maybe officers, is coming out of Normandy. These are all combat veterans with minor-ish injuries. Put them into hospital, patch them all up, send them back into combat. Try and keep, from the German point of view, try and keep that campaign alive. They're basically sometime out of Paris, because I said they've got Paris now. They basically turf these wounded guys off the trains to put Jewish people, the last few, and resistance fighters they've captured, to put them on the trains to take them off to murder them. So which of those options is helping you win the war? And which of those is just doubling down on your stupid, awful, evil ideology? So then they're doing it wrong for on a humanitarian basis, they're murdering people who don't deserve to be murdered, but they're also damaging their own ability to wage their defense of their Reich. It makes no sense.
Yeah, it's very, very illogical. And going back to Paris before the Bulge, I didn't realize that it was the French and the Spanish divisions or army that actually liberated Paris. Because I mean, I from a vague memory of Band of Brothers, I just remember the American soldiers going in, and I also didn't realize how impoverished Paris was based on just the films I've watched and stuff I've read. Could you go into a bit more detail about that?
Well, I mean, the genius historian to read about is the American historian Michael Nyberg. He's been on my World War II TV channel a few times, and he is a real loves France, speaks French, writes about the France. He talks about how the French and what's happening in France in 1940 is by his opinion way more important to get America in the war than Pearl Harbor on a larger, broader context. And he's the one who really talks about France and what's happening in France. And he writes about the whole, Vichy becoming the back part, and then the occupied zone becoming, one big, all that kind of stuff there. And Paris was, there's a symbolic nature of France, of Paris to the French, obviously, that the Allies don't see. And, again, not as human beings, I'm sure Allied generals didn't really want to see the great works of art in the Louvre destroyed and the Eiffel Tower burning down, but really it's not their key priority. The key priority is to smash the German military to bring this war to an end, if something could be done to protect that. But yeah, but the unit that ended up being the ones to race off, sort of against orders, was the French Second Armored Division under General Leclerc, which wasn't his real name. His real name was Hautecloque, which is an aristocratic French name, and his family were living under the German occupation, which is why he had to serve under a code name of Leclerc, which is like Smith in French. It's a very common name. He's in a supermarket chain
Yeah,
called
yeah.
Leclerc. Although he adopted the name Leclerc after the war until he
Oh,
was killed in an air crash. So he kind of he became the Leclerc Hautecloque. So now I think the family is Leclercs. Anyway, he's in August, middle of August, he is engaged in pursuing the Germans into what is now becoming the Falaise pocket in Normandy. And essentially what happened is a French resistance guy from Paris, he'd been a colonel in 1940, I think, gets out of Paris is encircled and defended by but he gets out of Paris and he ends up arriving at Leclerc's headquarters somewhere near Argenton down in Normandy, and basically says to Leclerc, look, we're ready to strike. The resistance is there. We're ready to do this. And people are starving.
hmm.
And Leclerc, in a kind of a clever bit of kind of man management, kind of convinces Bradley, who is technically his superior commander, that he's going to still kind of do the Falaise thing. But basically, he's off out the door, into his tanks, into his half tracks. But one of the component units, well, there's also colonial troops in Second Armored Division. There are black troops from Senegal. There are Moroccan troops in wearing the brown, almost like Jedi style robes and things like that. But it's actually the Spanish unit, and I can't remember the name of the guy who's actually commanding it. He's the first Allied unit into Paris is this Spanish unit. So their origins is they'd fought on in the Spanish Civil War, of course. Then via various routes, they ended up fighting via North Africa. And then they end up in this force of French who are not just French from France; they're French from the colonies who have joined the call. And so, but by then, when he starts speeding off, the Allies, Eisenhower goes, well, that we can't unsupport our friend now. So the American 4th Division goes up to help as well. And then later on, by the time of the Ardennes offensive, everybody's going on leave in Paris. So that's why people like Dick Winters and Band of Brothers went there on leave, because it was the place to go. And then von Choltitz, who was the commander of Paris, who'd been fighting in Normandy before then. The book I'm writing right now, Choltitz is a major character. He then becomes regarded by history as the savior of Paris because he doesn't give the order to detonate all the bridges and stuff like that, which is not untrue. But he had been fighting fanatically for the German cause earlier and wasn't particularly worried about what was happening to villages and towns where his army was fighting. So he's been rather kind of elevated a bit as this sort of peace-loving, and it was but it was frustration as well. But anyway, that's another digression there. But yeah, but the Paris has a symbolic meaning to the French that the Allies didn't quite get. But then weirdly, then we have to continue then. So Brussels ends up getting liberated, and one of the first units in is the Belgian Piron Brigade, who are fighting with the British and Canadian armies. But they think, well, we let the French liberate Paris, we let the Belgians liberate Brussels. So there becomes sort of a nicety that, because, well, you let that country liberate their capital, can't we liberate? And that's part of the problem that Eisenhower has, is that having to keep all these different factions singing from the same hymn sheet and keeping it, all the different languages. And of the 17 or so nations that take part on D-Day, they are people from republics, from monarchies, from frankly not very democratic origins. South Africa was a bit of a dodgy place in the 1940s, but they're one of our allies. And so keeping all those people with different, they've definitely got different aspirations after war, and they probably got different methods of how they would like to see the war come to an end. Again, back to this idea of liberating territory, destroying German armies. If you're a Norwegian naval guy off the beaches, you want the Allies to race up and liberate Norway. That's what you want. You want your mum and dad to be free. If you're an American, your mum and dad aren't necessarily, well, unless you're a German American or a Polish American, but you're thinking maybe more globally.
Mm.
So everybody's ideas about how it should be fought are slightly different. And Eisenhower's having to manage all this. It's like, I don't know, deciding on the playlist for a car journey of people of 4 different age groups. You're
It's
never
not.
going to please everybody.
Yeah.
So, yeah,
I didn't realize it was 17 countries, but it makes sense because of the
technically it's more
Commonwealth
than
and
that.
all the colonies. Yeah.
There,
And
there are, I think it's 17 nations that actually have a component fighting under their own flag, so to speak.
mm,
But you can add a hell of a lot more countries when you add like individual pilots, individual crewmen, and things like that. There would have been people from various West Indian countries in the Royal Air Force.
mm,
They're not flying as from Jamaica as a country, but they are Jamaican within the Royal Air Force. I
mm.
mean, I did a show on my channel recently about the liberation of the nearly 600 internment and concentration camps that were in Norway in 1944. And one of the
Wow.
great things about the Allied deception campaign and what's going on is the Germans still have 300,000 plus troops defending Norway in 1944 who would have been far better used
Mm,
in Italy or Yugoslavia and Norway, because there is no eventual landing in Norway. There is no big hurrah. By the time they get into Norway, the war's pretty much over.
mm.
Um, so that this I forgot where my train of thought was there. The multinational view is complicated, and the fact that, as I always would say, that within these camps in Norway, and we're not sure how, but there were 2 Chinese people in a camp in
Wow.
Norway.
How did they get there?
I think it ended up being people from 46 different nations were held in camps.
Wow.
Even when they liberated Bergen-Belsen, I think there were people from 30 different countries there when the British
Wow.
went in there. And it's one of the things I'm always banging on about is the broad internationalness of World War II.
Mm,
You look going back to D-Day, which is sort of the subject of this conversation. You have the American flag above Utah and Omaha, the British flag above Gold and Sword, and the Canadian flag above Juno. But there are Americans on Gold, there are Brits on Utah, there are Poles coming ashore on Gold later on, there are French on Sword, there are Danish sailors off Utah. It's just that if you had all those the flags above the beaches, the design experts, I know you can't have that. It's like London Underground map. We can't make any sense. Just put the British flag there. That's all they need to know. But the thing is, as we're in the 21st century now, everything's split, everything's binary, is that the more we look back and realize how we managed all this
mm,
despite our differences. We all did. It's a cliche, but it's a true cliche. All these nations did come together and fight against something that was obviously a tyrannical or 2 tyrannical empires, and then a third one when we had to then turn our attention against the Soviets in the Cold War later on. And it does just show that it works. If you've got a common goal and you want to work together, all these different people can work together. So World War II is truly international. And wherever you go, there's always this variation and complication of nationalities. If someone says, "Well, it wasn't my war," well, it was your war. It's like even the great majority of victims of the Holocaust were Jewish. Of course they were. 6 million of the 11 million. But if we just keep talking about it as the persecution of the Jewish, it doesn't relate to people who are non-Jewish.
mm.
Far better is to talk about the fact it was people who were mentally handicapped and poets and homosexuals and all that, because then we all have a connection. No, I would defy anybody. I don't know any human being in my circle of friends who doesn't have someone in their family or close circle of friends who wouldn't be a target of the Nazis and their policy of killing people. You know,
Wow.
we all know a musician, we all know a poet, we all know a politician, and I mean politicians in the sense of just mayors and
Yeah.
councillors. We all know LGBTQ people. I mean, the Germans are persecuted. Right now, the world is struggling to accept that not everybody is male or female. But Germans have identified that in the 1930s. They've decided they're going to kill them. There are books about the persecution of trans people in Berlin. So the Germans have not only acknowledged they exist, they've decided they want to kill them. You know,
Mm.
9 decades ago now. So we all have a connection with a group of people, or we are from that group, one of the groups of people that were being persecuted. And what's more, had the Germans succeeded, they would have just gone to a second round.
Mm.
Well, we've got rid of the first lot. Who don't we like now?
Yeah.
I'm being facetious, but were the Welsh on the list? Left-handed people? You know, I don't. I mean, I'm joking about a dark subject, but that people, empire that evil would not just stop at the first round. Oh yeah, we've done it now.
Yeah.
They'd have just carried on.
Well, they'd have to find a new scapegoat as well, wouldn't
Yeah,
they? Once they
yeah,
killed all the people that they had on the first list, right?
yeah. So okay. So it's the whatever. It's left-handed people or whatever
Yeah.
it would be. They're the scourge of the earth. That's the yeah. Anyway,
Yeah. And when did Paris get liberated? And then how long until the Battle of the Bulge occurred? So what was the time frame between those two key events?
so Paris is liberated towards the end of August. And then you have what the Allies call the Great Swan, which is the racing up of the French coast by mostly Canadians to take the various ports up past Dieppe up there. You have the Rhine, basically the next after Paris, and in fact even after D-Day, the next hurdle is to cross the Rhine River. And the not the weird thing, but the geography of Europe is in the west and in the east. The rivers tend to run north-south. So the Russians fighting out of the Soviet Union have to cross the Dnieper and the Volga and all these other rivers there. And the Allies have got some smaller ones, but the big one is the Rhine. The Rhine, which in certain cases is the border of Germany, but that's the next big thing. So basically, as they had been doing before D-Day, where there's a build-up, is that after August, it's essentially, although there are advances going on, it's basically getting all the Allied armies up to near the Rhine to then do the next thing. I mean, technically, some of Patton's Third Army are near the Rhine by as early as September 1944, because the
Wow.
Rhine is very big and
Yeah.
covers. And at that point, Patton's Third Army has elements fighting to the west in Brittany and elements to the east of France towards the Rhine River. His army is actually spanning the entire width of France, which is extraordinary at that point
Mm.
there. But then, of course, the winter's coming. And the winter of 44, 45, just to add another little dimension, was the worst weather of the 20th century. Just for
Of course it was.
if there's a deity in charge of anything, yeah, I'll give them a really shitty winter as well, just to add on to this, which snarls things up and takes delays and then the Allies do the gamble of Market Garden, which was it was right to do some sort of gamble because the Germans have had lots of armies beaten and smashed in Normandy. It was like, okay, we have been going for this methodical approach and it is working and we will get to a victory, but we have enough resources now to try something a little bit, we're 2 goals up. If I go back to
Mm.
football, we can try something. Market Garden doesn't work, which then delays things a bit. And then the winter hits, and then you're really not talking about a proper offensive again till sort of February 45. So, but the strategic air bombing is carrying on, and it's still bringing German industry to its knees, and et cetera. And the Russians are still advancing from the east. So it's the German boundaries are being pressured from all sides. In Italy, they have to kind of get up over the Gothic line, over the mountains, essentially to then attack via Austria and what have you. So that's going the mountains are going to slow things down there. So naturally, after the autumn of 44, geography, weather starts just slowing things down again, ready for that next dramatic advance in the spring.
And what can you tell me a bit more about Market Garden? It rings a bell, but what was the intention and why didn't it work?
So that's the bridge too far. The movie with Sean Connery and all the people that are too old for you. But anyway,
No, I
so
like that film. It's good.
it's sort of the heart of German. What little German ability they have to wage war is based in the Ruhr, the industrial heartland of Germany, the same place where the dam busters had dropped the bouncing bombs on the dams a year and a bit earlier. And getting to the Ruhr and eliminating German production and last of the factories is the center. The Allies are bombing it from the air. And it's just, can we get there faster than just the Eisenhower is insisting on a broad front strategy, which basically means the Allied army is in a north-southwest line, and I'm going to use the word creeps. It steadily rolls eastwards,
Mm.
so that you get all of it's moving at the same speed. A narrow front, which is what some people were suggesting, Montgomery sort of wanted to do that, is that you kind of push out in one place and are very bold and dynamic, and you split the German army, and then you kind of, you know, get out from the other side of the wall, so to speak, like a Trojan horse almost,
Mm.
that without the deception. And so Market Garden is the dropping of 3 airborne divisions into the Netherlands across. It's all about the Rhine River with the lower Rhine. We're talking this time in Arnhem. So it's Eindhoven, Nijmegen, and Arnhem. So you drop these airborne divisions over these bridges, and then British ground troops race out of Belgium because we liberated Belgium by September. This begins on September the 17th, and you race up this sort of 80-mile road with the ground troops then linking up with all these various airborne elements, and you've got this big wedge into the Ruhr, because just after Arnhem, you can carry across the bridge. A few miles down the road, there's the Ruhr. And it didn't work because, for various reasons that we could do on a second discussion at some point in the future, planned a bit too hastily. There were a couple of German armor divisions in the way that fought very tenaciously. The decisions about how to resupply the divisions by air weren't done as well. Some commanders had not their best day on the ground, et cetera, et cetera. It didn't work.
Mm.
And the British 6th Airborne Division, I think it's like 7,000 paratroopers jumped in and were taken by glider to Arnhem, and only about 1,000 came out. The rest were killed, captured, or wounded.
Wow.
So it's the worst defeats for the Allies. So it's against the run of play. That, you know, that's kind of what's happening over that part of the autumn and winter 44.
Mm. And you've had many experiences with veterans, and you've walked the battlefields with the veterans. And in terms of the beaches, which was the quote best and worst beach to have landed on? And have you ever looked at where you were born and at what age where you were living, and see which beach you would have landed on if you were a 20-year-old in?
Yeah, I mean, being from Essex, I'd have probably ended up in the Essex Regiment, which would have been on Gold Beach, 56th Independent Brigade. I'd have had a medium type landing. Gold was not the worst, not the easiest. And you know, we had, again, with labels, things like that, we have these different metrics by which we look at a beach of how it's successful. And bloody Omaha is the phrase we use. And one of my ready to go podcasts is that Omaha isn't a disaster. Omaha is a successful landing that started badly.
Yes.
And when you add the casualties there, sure, there are a couple of thousand more wounded there than the other beaches, but it's also a much larger landing force. It's 2 divisions landing in Omaha, where it's 1 on the other 4 beaches. So, of course, you're going to get more people killed because the landing force is twice as big. And so there's various variables there. But what's fascinating is that each of the 5 beaches presents its own problems. There are issues with all of them. The Germans have advantages and disadvantages. Utah has floods behind and single roads through the floods, which means they're kind of killing zones. Omaha has bluffs behind it in a curved shape, so the fire is better for the Germans to defend. Sword and Juneau are urbanized, so there are houses to fight around. Gold has a set of inland defenses, like 3 or 4 miles inland on a ridge, which are another problem, which we didn't have as much information about because they're hidden in woods, things like that. So you could spend ages talking about, here's the problems with this one, here's the good things about this one, and it, you know, but essentially they all worked. As I said earlier, they all worked. And then over the next few weeks, it gets into this other thing. And it's the interesting thing when you're there with veterans, which now doesn't happen much anymore, because they've pretty much all passed away, is that they tend to have a very narrow view of the war from what their experience was, which is always true because it's emotionally true to them, but can be short on detail and factually incorrect, if that makes sense. To name drop, you know, for those who have seen Band of Brothers, you know, Wild Bill Garnier was a good friend of mine. You know, lost his leg in the Ardennes, and And Bill said to me, we were outside the museum, he said, because we were talking about the Battle of Bloody Gulch, June the 13th, in this period when it's changing from the beachhead to the attritional phase. And he was talking about the German armored vehicles that are attacking him. And as he kind of said it, I felt they were attacking me personally. And I said, well, you know what? E Company didn't have it as bad as F Company down the road. And in the series, the TV series, F Company are seen to be the villains of the piece. They run away and leave a gap. Well, it's not the case. The F Company actually knocked out several armored vehicles and were the heroes of the day. And anyway, I was explaining all this to Wild Bill, and he was saying, he said, well, because he took it all on board, he said, the thing is, every soldier thinks they're in the shittiest foxhole with the most water around their feet, with the most artillery shells exploding over their head, with the nastiest sergeant shouting at them, with all that. He said, it's the historian's job, he said, to rank it all, but it's very awkward telling a veteran who's telling you very movingly about his best friend being killed and saying, well, you weren't in the shitty part of the battle that day. I mean, I would never say it that way.
Yeah.
You try and go, because he would think, the veteran might say, so what was happening elsewhere? And he said, well, you'd say something like, well, as bad as your day was for you, consider what was happening down here. There was this lot had an entire Panther column descend on them. They'd go, oh, wow, we only had, and you have these conversations where you meet in the middle. But the veterans are, what's interesting, is one of the reasons I want to talk to you is that you're going to be carrying, I mean, you do all sorts of aspects of history and interviews and politics and everything, but we're going to have to bridge this gap of we will not have people who lived through the war tell us stuff. What do we do? We've always had the official reports written at the time. We've also got the aerial photos to look at and say, well, there is that tank, and that incredible ability to do information now. A friend of mine's coming over to Normandy 2 days' time. Stephen Fisher wrote a fantastic book about Sword Beach, and he's an archaeologist and he's a geek. He wouldn't mind me saying this. And he can run software where if he knows the height of a stone wall in a village in 1944, and there's a black and white photo, and there's a shadow being cast off the wall, and he knows how far across the road the shadow extends, he can work out the time of day the photo was taken at.
Wow.
The exact type of day.
Wow.
So you might have a war diary that says, yes, the Sherwood Rangers Yeomanry came off the village and mid-afternoon moved inland. He can go, it was 2:43. It was 2:43 p.m. because that ability to get information is fantastic. But then the oral history telling is that it's not the veterans so much, it's the children and grandchildren who've heard a bit. And they get it a bit wrong, And the example is that we get this all the time. I don't do much guiding, but 20 years as being a battlefield guide, is a family will contact us and say, yeah, my granddad was on Utah Beach on D-Day. Oh, great. And you want to see his, yes, we'd love to retrace his steps. Or it could be a British person on Sword Beach. I'm not picking on the Americans. Then you ask them, you say, well, do you know what unit he was in? Oh, I don't know, but here's a picture of him in his jacket. And the jacket will show the insignia of, let's say it's the American 83rd Division, who came ashore 3 weeks after D-Day. So you say, oh, yes, we can definitely follow the route of the 83rd Division. They had a fantastically interesting campaign. They fought all through the hedgerows that was Carrington on, and they involved in Operation Cobra. But just for the record, they didn't come ashore on June the 6th. They came ashore 3 weeks later. And then the customer will be quite indignant. No, Granddad came ashore on D-Day. And what happens is, it turns out the granddad always said he came ashore on Utah Beach because he did, or in that case, in fact, 83rd, I think it was Omaha. No, it was Utah Beach. But the family, post the veteran's death, have added D-Day because that's their perception. But if you're half decent at maths, Jacob, 836,000 American troops landed on Utah Beach between June and November, and about 24,000 on the first day. So that means if you meet an American who landed on Utah Beach, mathematically, there's about a 96% chance he landed in the days after D-Day. But it's about also the fact that there's this idea that if you didn't land on D-Day, somehow you didn't count. Using the football analogy, it'd be like maybe the centre forward doesn't play in the FA Cup final because he'd got a broken ankle, but he'd played and scored all the goals in the earlier rounds. but because it's in the FA Cup final, he doesn't count, you know. And D-Day is the FA Cup final, and in fact, the analogy falls apart because then the earlier round happened afterwards. Because, but I stand by my point.
Yeah.
There's this: if you weren't D-Day, you don't count. If you weren't first wave on D-Day, you don't count.
Mm.
You know, and again, the reality is, because I explained about the big war the Allies are about to bring, the huge enormity of the tale is the great majority of Allied soldiers never fired a rifle.
Wow.
They never really had bombs exploding in their face, because what they're doing is putting boxes of ammunition on trucks and driving those trucks to front, or they're repairing the Sherman tanks, or they're building the airfields, or they're, let's say, the train battalions. But there's this idea we have that if you're not a proper guy at the front with a rifle, you're not a proper hero. You know, well, I get that. I get that that's very symbolic. And I grew up in the comics era where the comics weren't about, the guys repairing the tanks. They're about fighter pilots and paratroopers and commandos and climbing cliffs and throwing grenades into jerry bunkers and coming. Yeah. But that's only part of it. Without the shaft of the spear, there is no spear.
Mm.
I was on Omaha Beach with a veteran and his family. We were looking at a monument listing all the units, like the camouflage battalions and the prisoner interrogation units. And some other American tourists kind of heard this guy talking about the fact he was in this camouflage unit. I know he was in a quartermaster's unit, so supplies. And this random person asked him, "So how essential was your job as a quartermaster?" And this veteran, who would have been 80-something, said to the group, "Well, not essential, of course. But without us, every soldier at the front line would be naked without any ammunition."
Yeah, true.
That absolutely summed it up. Without someone issuing the ammunition, you can't put it in your rifle. Without someone making sure you've got a new pair of boots to put on if yours have been blown up by a grenade, you can't win. A soldier can't fight without boots.
Mm.
So embracing understanding that heroes come in all shapes and sizes and all roles is part of where we need to keep moving forward. And again, like with the nations, it's not just Brits, Americans, and Canadians on D-Day. It's Norwegians, it's Poles, it's all these people there, and many of them, as I say, didn't fire a rifle. They were doing something incredibly important, vital. And all this builds back these hundreds and thousands of planners who put the plan together, the people who analyze the photos. Without their work, and they never left an office in Surrey, but without their work, the commandos can't scale the cliffs or attack the gun battery.
Mm. Yeah, we always remember the most action-packed minority who were on the first wave. But then you can't fuel a war without a supply line and without the code breakers and without the people in the factories. And everyone was contributing to the war effort. And if you were just a spear without the shaft, like you said, you wouldn't have any backbone. So if the Germans did push back like they tried to, then the whole operation would have failed, and we'd probably be speaking German potentially if there wasn't all these other waves that don't get the recognition that they deserve. And if we look at Saving Private Ryan, for example, obviously Hollywood loves to portray things maybe a bit more over the top, to say the least. What were most of the landings like for the first, second, and third waves, the first few days, from what the veterans said to you? Because you said that most of the soldiers didn't even fire a gun or didn't even have a bomb explode near them. But in terms of the first few waves, what was that experience like compared to what the Hollywood movies portray?
I mean, the Saving Private Ryan pretty much nails the experience of a first wave landing, be it Normandy or it essentially represents Tara and Peleliu, and is that by definition, the first wave gets it worse, because invariably the Allied bombing and the Allied naval fire has not managed to eliminate the Germans any more than it had eliminated the Japanese in their coconut log bunkers on Iwo Jima and those bases out there. So you end up having to step out of a landing craft with 30 other guys and cross several hundred yards of sand with however many artillery pieces, machine guns firing at you. And the German need is to eliminate that first wave. And so the first wave experience, although technically the Rangers in Saving Private Ryan are a little bit later, about an hour later, but it's still broadly, and they're showing the remains of the first wave. So it's a good representation, but it's only showing the first act of the movie, if you like.
Yeah.
And then once Tom Hanks and his men with his chewing gum and his mirror on the bayonet, and they fought up the D1 drawer and got the D1 drawer open, it then cuts to whatever it is 2 or 3 days later or something, and you see the beach with the supply. But it doesn't show you even within hours of when they're landing. I mean, you could be landing on certain parts of Omaha Beach by as early as 10 in the morning to almost no gunfire. And of
Mm,
140 men stepping ashore, maybe one being killed. But the
mm,
first wave, A Company 116th Infantry on Dog Green on Omaha Beach suffered, basically were wiped out. It's
wow.
90% killed or wounded in the first few minutes because they just walked into that, what was there. But what often doesn't get talked about because of the emotional horror of a community being wiped out because they were origins were National Guard divisions, so a lot from a particular part of Virginia called Bedford, is that you think, oh God, all these families, all these telegrams going back to this one town, and which happened,
Mm,
but they're not talking about the fact that the Germans have now spent all their ammunition pretty much trying to stop that first wave, but they have been unsuccessful
yeah.
because 15 minutes later, the second wave comes ashore. And then the third wave comes ashore. And as each successive wave comes ashore, because there's all these ships behind unloading, the conveyor belt has started conveying,
Mm,
is that they can't stop it. If you come over to Normandy one day and I'll show you how the recesses in the walls, in the bunkers for the ammunition cases, they don't have enough for more than a few minutes of sustained fire.
mm,
And once that's gone, doesn't matter how dedicated you are. I mean, how many times Hitler has told you that you will not be defeated. You're an Aryan soldier. The Allies are hopeless. They're degenerate. Whatever it was. Once your ammunition's gone, you're screwed. And so the semi-pro Ryan is accurate, and particularly the sound. If you go back, say as a movie buff, go back and look at any of the sort of 1960s, 70s, even 80s movies. They're just using straight off the audio file sound effect. It's the same ricochets they use in Western, right?
yeah.
That pew kind of sound like that. But for Private Ryan, they went as far as embedding microphones into beef carcasses and had them pick up the sound of the sound of bullets hitting flesh.
Wow.
They had the microphone set up to get the sound effect so that when you were in the cinema watching it, as I did, I saw it 2 or 3 times each night in a row,
Oh, so cool.
you are hearing the bullets coming behind you.
Yeah.
We take that for granted now that you go and watch a Batman film and it's all happening around you. But this was the early days. This is Dolby and all that kind of stuff. So I know I knew a few veterans. Harold Baumgarten, who was on Omaha Beach, 29th Division, he was B Company. So he came in 15 minutes after A Company. And he had been in A Company and transferred. He was wounded 7 times in Omaha.
Wow.
Hal was. A bullet went through his face and incredible guy. But I can watch it with the sound off, with the sound comes on behind the couch, because it
Wow.
took me back because it was a 3-dimensional
Mm,
representation. And the washed out colors. And they did that bit where Tom Hanks goes under the water and his hearing goes.
yeah.
And veterans have told me, God, that was spookily realistic. Because if a bomb goes off near you, even if you're not hurt by it, your hearing goes and you get that ringing.
Mm,
And then that weird feeling of isolation and spatial awareness is changed. What's weird is that Saving Bright Ryan now seems old hat because the desaturation, the sound effects have now been copied so many times. Psycho, the horror film, doesn't seem groundbreaking now. Neither does Jaws, because the dolly track thing going to Roy Scheider's face has been done so many times now. We don't recognize Spielberg's genius.
mm,
But Saving Private Ryan, when it started, which is Spielberg again, was bent. Well, firstly, you didn't get to know who the characters were. Every war movie before started with people boarding trains, saying goodbye to their sweethearts,
yeah.
going through training, funny bits. One of them has a girlfriend. One of them reads a letter saying about his girlfriend, which means he's going to die. The trope is you're going to die. Saving Private Ryan, boom, you're straight in the landing.
Yeah.
I don't know who anybody is. And when you recognize Tom Hanks, you might recognize Tom Sizemore, but you don't know who the guy. And you're, I remember being in the cinema. People are, well, but I haven't had time to start my popcorn.
Yeah.
You're straight in. You're straight into the visceral violence. The rest of the movie gets a bit there, but the first 20 minutes hold up.
Mm,
And And so it conveyed something that hadn't been conveyed before. And I think it also opened up for veterans to talk about it emotionally. You know what? I was shit scared all the time. The bit where you see Tom Hanks' hands trembling.
Mm.
I mean, it's not a complete truth to say, but a lot of the old 1950s movies didn't show human weakness and frailty.
Yeah.
Or if they did, it was a negative trait. There was the coward in the unit, you know. But a hero wasn't allowed to show, weakness and nerves. But Saving Private Ryan, sort of made it okay. Tom Hanks is troubled by the whole thing. So that's for that reason alone, and the fact his men don't necessarily support the mission,
Mm.
because there's this very strong idea that every soldier who fought in World War II was fighting for democracy, was fighting for a better world, which they were, but they didn't see it that way at the time.
Mm.
They're your age, and they're fighting because they want to go back and date the girlfriend again. They want to get drunk, and they want to do they want to do what 20-year-olds do. And then later on, when they became old men, they would say, "Oh, I was fighting back against the jackboot of Nazi tyranny, and I, as a red-blooded male from Sheffield or New York or Sydney, felt this desire." No, paratroopers became paratroopers because you got jump pay.
Mm.
You got 50, but if Americans, you got $50 a month extra, which you could spend all on booze and girls if you wanted to. It was
Mm.
Whereas your regular army wage, you had to send some of it back into your family, and you were advised to put into war bonds. But your para money was yours. It was basically just tax-free spending cash.
Mm.
Or you wanted a smarter uniform to pull the birds. And
Yeah.
I'm not knocking the motivation. I'm just saying that I'm going on a tangent of I struggle, right, personally, to think of the veterans as either being, I can think of them as when they're 20,
Mm.
and I can think of them when they're in their 90s. I struggle to think of them when they're middle aged. It doesn't seem to connect to me.
Really?
There was that point when they were 50 something,
Yeah.
and they were grumpy, and they were telling their kids that they were wearing the wrong clothes. And what are you listening to? What's that music you're listening to? Whatever it would be back then. What's punk then? What's ska? I've essentially, even though I know them, I've idealized them
Yeah.
as these sort of these incredibly old, wise people with life lessons, which I have absolutely got from veterans,
Mm.
or these young symbols of determination. But actually, the middle bit is really interesting because that's when their human flaws turn up,
Mm.
because they weren't all perfect.
Yeah.
How can you have millions of men serving their country without some of them being assholes?
Mm. Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
I'm not saying they all were, but
Yeah.
of course they weren't. But so yeah, we need to take them off a pedestal that puts them into this sort of unattainable brilliance. They were. I don't like the moniker of the greatest generation personally.
Mm.
It was well intended. Tom Brokaw, the American journalist who came up with it, wanted to pay homage to these men he felt inspired by. And they were one generation, because I think Tom Brokaw's passed away, but he would be in his 70s, even 80s now. But when he knew them, they were a generation older than him. What it's come to represent is, greatest means that all the men before weren't as good,
Mm.
and all the men are, and particularly the men after.
Mm.
The veterans I got to know were hopeful that their grandkids, your generation, would be better than them. If we peaked 80 years ago, what's the point?
Yeah.
I want to think you're better. I watch a lot of reels and stuff. These people in the States now, these young people your age, debating the idiots of the world, and I'm not into my politics as such, but I'm lefty liberal mainly. I have hope in this because they're using microphones and podcasts to wage their wars.
Mm.
They don't have to go. You won't. Hopefully, you won't have to go and don khaki and learn how to fire a rifle. You can be a greater generation by debate.
Mm.
So I hate the greatest generation label. It makes that evolution, the meme with the one of as it goes up from ape, the one of those turn around lads, we've got it all wrong. What's the point of thinking? We peaked.
Yeah.
We peaked in World War II. It was just on a no.
Mm.
We're gonna get better.
Yeah.
It was a great generation that saved us from a lot of stuff, but it wasn't the greatest.
Mm. Exactly. Yeah, because we have progressed as a society since then, and
Yeah.
both technologically, both intellectually, ideologically. And what you're saying about the 20-year-olds and the 90-year-olds, you don't see the middle bit. You can't see them as a representation. Reminds me of something called the peak end rule, where say we're on a holiday, we always remember the most exciting part of the holiday and
Yeah.
then the end of it, and we forget everything else. It's almost the kind of same kind of thought pattern where you remember where they peaked, which was, I guess, when they were
Yeah.
young, and then you remember them as 90-year-olds. But I'm the same. I can't imagine, a dad, middle-aged who
Yeah,
fought as
exactly.
D-Day.
I'm exactly the age now, 56. I can't imagine the veterans being like me, but being that bit when I'm unashamedly getting grumpy and cynical, and I don't care, and I find myself doing saying things that my dad would say. I go, oh God, what are you doing? What, that song, it's all just noise. Oh my God, that's what my dad said to me when I was listening to the punk when I was, I was 18. But, so, and the veterans had to have got those that survived, because of course we're not acknowledging that it's not just loss in war, it's the guys that came back and women to altruism. And I did a show on my channel last night about a group of Marines, sick Marines on Saipan, and this particular veteran came back, and pretty much every night in his marriage he would wake up at some point in the night and try and strangle his wife
Wow.
because of Japanese people getting into their foxholes and trying to kill them. Obviously he never killed his wife, but she'd wake him up and go, but when she learned how to preempt it and say, she would get to know his sleep patterns. So she could be awake to kind of tap him and say, no, you're okay. You're home. The war was 40 years ago.
Wow.
So she's a casualty of the war as well,
Yeah.
because she has to spend she loves this guy, but he's got these demons he's carrying. And that we need to accept the fact that the war broke these guys and women, as well as it was often the thing of their lives they look back to with the feeling of the importance as they look back on it and go, God, I was part of that. I was part of that crusade in Europe. The first use of the expression United Nations was in Eisenhower's D-Day leaflet thing that was given to the troops. We are United Nations. It was the first. Then it becomes a thing. There had been the League of Nations. So these guys and women were part of this idea, but they didn't really know that at the time, because when you're 19, you don't necessarily know that was I part of a movement? I realized at my age I was part of the movement to make sure that homosexuality was appreciated, understood, and welcome. I'm not myself, but I did some work in hospitals with people with AIDS who were treated as, they were treated horrendously. So I didn't know it at the time, but I suppose I was part of that movement in a very small, minor way of just trying to make sure it was normalizing it. And these guys kind of normalized defeating great evil, even though they didn't quite know they were part of it at the time.
Yeah, it's always clearer in hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what was it like recently filming as part of the Tom Hanks History Channel programs?
Well, it's something I've done a few times over the years, and it's weird because I shouldn't be getting TV work now, in the sense that I'm a white middle-aged guy, and I'm all for diversity but for some reason, Tom Hanks is a white, but he's slightly older than middle-aged now. But he's had, he has been dominating the acceptance of what that generation did, and he may have hold the greatest generation idea, but because of him, we have had Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, and his push for the National World War II Memorial in DC and things like that. His veterans advocacy work, and I could tell you things that he does personally without publicity for veterans, families, not just in World War II, other wars. He's just one of those life's decent blokes, and he realizes he has realized he's got enough reputation, clout to kind of mostly circumvent the polarization of our society. He's loved by most Americans, right, left, because he's Tom Hanks. He's like Jimmy Stewart a generation earlier. So he's doing this new, I think it's a 20-part series, but that may include several parts that are specifically about the Holocaust. I don't know the workings of it. It's going to eventually be on History Channel. And so I'm one of the talking heads on it, which I've done a few times before, which is an interesting experience. You get to go and film. And the first thing people said to me is, did you get to meet Tom Hanks? And I said, well, no. My friends who were being recorded, Michael Nyberg, who I mentioned earlier, who was recorded, but interviewed, he lives in New York. I said, or Tom Hanks wasn't at his recording, so he certainly wasn't going to be at mine in Whitechapel, London. No, I'm sure Tom Hanks would like Whitechapel. I quite like Whitechapel, but no, he wasn't there. But I passed the audition thing. You do it like this, you do an online thing, and they check you out not because they're checking out your knowledge, they're checking out your ability to convey it more than anything else. Because there's some people who can, as I did, I was 5 beaches, and somehow they take all the drama out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And hopefully I've come across as kind of, can tell these stories in a reasonably entertaining, exciting way. And so, but the thing is, you're not really giving your own answers like I am to you today. There is a script has been worked out, and they're filming several people saying the same thing. So you can kind of put it into your words a bit. I did one 10 years ago for another History Channel one, and I was very, I was a bit too principled about what I would and wouldn't say. I was, I know I wouldn't say that. Now I bent a bit with this time. I would say, look, can I say this? And I would kind of meet them in the middle. I mean, there was one particular bit where we were talking about Omaha Beach, and they'd liked something I said in the pre-interviews about, like I said to you, the stepping off the landing craft and going into the void. And I was talking about the smoke and the sensory sort of deprivation going there, and how you don't understand, although you're part of a task force of 156,000 men. Right now, you feel like it's just you and Jim beside you, because it's 60 landing craft in the first wave on Omaha Beach, but spread over 4.5 miles. So actually, there's like 100 meters gap to your left and 100 meters gap to your right, and there's 400 yards of sand ahead of you. So you feel like you're standing. I guess you'd feel like I noticed some veterans. You'd have felt like you're standing in the middle of Wembley Stadium or something, all on your own.
Yeah.
And they'd liked all this stuff. And they said, now can you move to Sword Beach, where basically things were going okay? And I was like, well, and they kind of were on a grand scheme of things, because it's sort of 4,000, about 900 killed on Omaha Beach and about 3,000 wounded on Omaha Beach, whereas Sword Beach is maybe a couple of hundred killed, depending on where you define the beach, and a few hundred wounded. But so it seems less.
Yeah.
But the swing seemed too dramatic. It seemed that all the drama was on Omaha. Meanwhile,
we walk on the beach on Sword.
Meanwhile, I'm walking the shore on Sword Beach. So I was able to say it in a slightly different way. So I did the Normandy, the Berlin. So the Normandy, the Ardennes, and the Berlin episodes were 3. They at one point they wanted me for the Market Garden one, but they didn't in the end for some reason. So I sat in the studio for 3 hours or something, and they recorded me. I had like 4 cameras on me, because there's also a camera doing a Zoom links to the producers back in the USA. But I understand that Tom Hanks had some say in who were the people who got through the interview stage. So I like to think he has
picked you out.
He's seen me doing my stuff. When yes, the guy in the hat, I like him. He's good. And it's it's important knowledge, although that TV series will to some extent simplify things, because even in 20 episodes, there's a lot of war. It will be a little, not kind of paint by numbers, but there'll have to be kind of skipping of things. It will have a reach because it's Tom Hanks. And I like to think it'll help, and they're the new generation. And they're not, as far as I understand, they're not using any veterans interviews.
Oh, really?
Because there aren't any left, and it's all been done. They are. It's, as far as I know, it's the first one where they are just using historians as talking heads. Often in the past, it was a mixture of both. You'd have a veteran talking, and that's how it'll have to go. Unless you use archival footage.
Yeah.
Archiving, but they want to do it fresh, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see it. There's a few ending questions. You just touched on it. How will World War II history change once the last veteran passes away? Where do you think the shift is going to be? How's it going to change?
Well, ultimately, I don't know. I can't predict the future. I wish I could. This is the wider question of historiography, of understanding that there have been phases of how World War II has been looked at that we don't necessarily know we're in when we're in them.
Yeah.
But then afterwards you go, we were in that era. So right now, for example, we are very much in a dismissing of the Soviet contribution to World War II,
Really?
which is where we were 50 years ago. 50 years ago, as a Brit, you could write a book about the British and Normandy, Italy, and you didn't have to mention the Russians at all. It didn't matter. No one cared. But then, like 20 years ago, you had to say, to be inclusive, don't forget, for every German soldier killed in the Western Front, 8 were killed in the Eastern Front. The Soviets were doing the Soviets were doing the bigger amount of defeating of the Third Reich. But now, because of Ukraine,
Yeah.
understandably, and I'm not saying this is the wrong thing, it's all, well, they did it because of Lend-Lease. They did it because of the help they got. They didn't. So we're in a firmly downplaying the Soviet involvement now era. But presumably, let's say when rather than if, when the conflict in Ukraine comes to an end and Russian historians can now travel again, because now Russian historians aren't going on podcasts with Westerners. Putin is being an arse about it, as they say about many things. But there will be an era, let's hope, sooner than rather, a post-Putin era, where we can bring them back into the international fold and look back. So we're in a phase now that will come to an end. And my fear is that we will hold on to the words of the last few veterans a bit too much and not balance it. And the argument I have about that is that the last First World War proper trench vet was Harry Patch in Britain. Wonderful guy. I mean, just the most charming guy. But he was on his own as the last surviving vet for about 5 years, maybe even longer. And Harry Patch had a particular view of World War I, that it was a waste of time. It was, it was a futile thing, which never got involved, all that kind of stuff, which is a valid opinion.
Mm.
But people then used his words to speak for the entire generation. And I knew World War I veterans who said it was the greatest part of their life,
Yeah.
not only because if nothing else, because they had a decent pair of shoes.
Mm.
And trench warfare wasn't Blackadder. It wasn't, every month spent in rat-infested trenches. It was a rotation based.
Yeah.
And, but he ended up, Harry Patch, or not so much he, because he just said what he was asked. It was that people use his voice to speak for the entire generation.
Mm.
So I hope that we move forward, acknowledging that their vets are the people who participated in World War II had all different feelings. I hate it when anyone says the veterans wouldn't have liked this, and you see it about things like Brexit or reform, or even who the England manager is. The veterans wouldn't have wanted a German to be a.
Yeah.
There was millions of them. They had as many different views about everything as the rest of us. To think that the veterans came out of that war robotically all thinking in the same thing. No, of course not. Look at the election in 1945 when Churchill loses.
Yeah.
It was one of the years where I think I may be wrong on this. The most different parties stood in various elections in 45 because people. It was almost like the life of Brian, the Judean People's Fund and the People's Fund. It was the socialist communists, the communist socialists. And some of these towns handed up multiple candidates because people had ideas. People had different. We've won the war, but we're winning the war, but I want this, not quite that. So the idea that veterans have a single opinion is farcical, And so I hope we can appreciate that their experiences were wide and varied, and don't just. If a veteran said it, engrave it on a stone wall as it's somehow the experience of that generation, because it's not. It's the experience of that guy or that girl.
Yeah.
So I don't know how it's going to move in some ways. I mean, obviously World War II books are being written at a pace. They're still coming out. That We Have Ways, James Holland Al Murray Festival begins tomorrow. I'm not there this year. I was there last year. I'm at a conference in London next year in May. The interest is going on. Podcasts, YouTube, like me, films even is still carrying on. So the interest will be there. It's just, I hope to take it back to the beginning of this conversation. I hope there's just nuance. I hope there's people saying that let's look at this with a healthy dose of objectivity and balance, and try and represent all sides and look at the complicated nature of it and why were people fighting wars and all that, really.
Yes. Very, very good point, Paul. Very good point. And what's one action the audience should take from this conversation?
Oh, to I mean, read and read again. Um, Never take the first opinion about anything with regards. But don't even me. Even what I said about the war, question it. And don't just, well, he must know what he's been talking about because he's been on a documentary. Sure, but my opinions are changing all the time.
Mm.
Essentially, never think you know it all.
Yeah.
The best moments when I'm hosting my live streamings on World War II TV are when a view I had is turned on its head 180 by something the historian says.
Mm.
Now, it may, as I consider it later on, swing back towards where I started. But for a moment, you're like, whoa, and it will just go. Well, I can't give you an example right now, but it happens all the
Yeah.
time where
Yeah.
something I thought I knew is like, oh, wow. One of the moments I did something that occurred to me, right? About a moment that you just go, whoa, that's a different way of thinking about things.
Mm.
I grew up reading comics and watching war films where particularly the Australian soldier in comics was always stripped to the waist with the big muscles, and they were called Digger or Bluey, and they were, they worked on a big out in the outback. They were a farm hand. They were, and they were the brave guys, and they were fighting, and they were all this kind of stuff there, right? And so an Australian historian was on my channel a few years ago now, and he was saying because long story short, Australia's sort of policy was to defend Australia, not necessarily by being in Australia, but by to send its forces out to fight the war elsewhere.
Yeah.
So the Australians were fighting in Tobruk in North Africa because it's ultimately connected to the Suez Canal which is defending the supply lines Australia, which is in effect defending
Yeah.
Australia. Defending from the front line, going back to football, as opposed to defending from just the centre backs, right? But this wasn't universally held by Australian civilians. So you could be an Australian soldier. You could be this digger type sitting in your, and I'm not even going to call it a foxhole. It's a scrape you've scratched into the rock near Tobruk, where there's Italian armor divisions, German armor divisions, bombarding you day by day. You've had half a tin of bully beef for the last 3 days. You're on your own. The Air Force doesn't seem to be there. The Navy seem to have buggered off. You're holding out against this, and the mail might come up, and Australian civilians were anonymously going to the post office in Melbourne or Sydney and putting a white feather and a letter in it to an Australian soldier, to an Anzac, telling them that they're not serving their country properly because they're not in Australia defending it against Japanese attacks.
Wow.
And that blew my mind. There's this poor digger, which is a big, nickname, or Aussie, sitting there thinking that he's doing this for his wife, and he gets an anonymous no with a white feather. You're a coward because you're not actually
Yeah.
defending North Australia. And those are the moments that you go, I didn't know that.
Mm.
And it's about taking a subject and trying to come at it from as many different angles. Was the opinion I hold what was universally accepted back then, or am I thinking about it from a different post? The Britons standing alone in 1941, for example, alone if you don't count India,
Yeah. Yeah.
everywhere in Africa. There's alone and there's alone.
Yeah.
So be cynical, be critical, read different points of view. If you're Brit, don't just read British authors, read American authors, read French authors, just keep looking at history and the current world from as many different views as possible.
Mm.
Because we tend to just want to live in our little echo chambers.
Yes, for sure.
And that's very dangerous.
Very.
So that's my advice, and that applies to history as well as current affairs.
Mm.
Don't just go with consensus because they're around you. Challenge.
Mm. Definitely, 100% agree, Paul. And similarly, it's almost like a cognitive dissonance when you get a different perspective that you've never heard before, and it challenges your pre-existing beliefs, and it may feel uncomfortable in the moment.
Yeah.
But over time, you integrate that new belief with your previously held one and come up with a new one, and you've improved yourself.
Exactly. I mean, but you have to work at it.
Yes.
You have to. It's like if you to keep your brain functioning, you have to exercise it like you do, or I pretend I do my body. But and challenge it and make yourself. Why do I think this? Why? Churchill is a great case in point of someone who is complex. To try and pigeonhole him and say he's this, it's inherently flawed.
Yeah.
He was very good at some things and a pretty awful human being at other points, and he's all of those things, as all of us are.
Yes.
And I'm not an anti-Churchill person. I'm just saying look at it, examine it, and why do we think this? Why does that? Why does we different generations have different opinions about things? Why is one generation look at a certain person from a certain positive way and others a negative way? It's we evolve, we change, and I strive each day to not just think I know a subject, and just embrace it, embrace
Yeah.
the chaos of history being complicated, and that book will come and go. Well, I had no idea. That's reversed my thinking on this, and I still haven't got a firm opinion about what I really think about General Patton or Montgomery. I mean,
Mm.
they're both sort of dicks in some ways, but why?
Yeah.
There's a big debate about whether Montgomery, not just Montgomery, about how many of these World War II commanders were on the spectrum
Mm.
or they had something that would be diagnosed
Yeah.
now. Now, you can never go back and diagnose someone without fully examining, but there are strong suggestions that some of these guys
Yeah.
um, were autistic,
Yeah.
Asperger's, ADHD,
Mm.
and other variations, all added to and compiled on by the pressures they're under.
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, without going
um,
down a tangent, it is interesting how a lot of people in high positions do tend to have them traits. I was talking to a psychologist earlier today about the dark personality traits and, these successful psychopaths or the CEO
yeah,
lacking empathy and stuff. It's clearly advantageous for them in certain situations, like in war. It's very interesting.
yeah. I mean, we cannot have Eisenhower breaking down the tears every day and unable to go into his room to have a sulk because people have died under his command.
Yeah.
We could not have won the war with that. He has to be able to retain a distance from what he's doing. Even though it must have, I mean, we know it. We know because we read what he said when he went through Dachau. We read what he said about the Falaise Gap walking about. We know these things affected him. He just had to go. Yeah, no. I mean, he read Western novels. That was his thing. That was his equivalent of scrolling through reels on Facebook.
Yeah.
Is that he would sit in his bed and just read these dime 70-page quick, almost like comics, really, Western novels. That was his, scrolling.
Yeah.
But it kept him sane.
Mm.
Thank God.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah. And as final question, if you could give your 20-year-old self, 20-year-old Paul, one piece of advice, what would it be and why?
Oh, appreciate the now more. I did, but I didn't necessarily realize that I was in the halcyon days of football with all standing stadiums. I didn't realize that I was getting to know Major Howard, the guy who led the gliders at Pegasus Bridge, how cool it was to do all that stuff. I consider myself sort of the bridging of generations. I'm kind of part of my parents' generation of, meat and veg to, boring meals, no takeaways, bland British food, but also the kind of coming out after my generation of curries and things. And so I bridged that and, old music and new music, but I would go back now and appreciate more the period I was living in because it seemed a bit dark. When I was 20 in sort of 1989, just coming out of the 80s and, 70s and strikes,
Yeah.
it seemed pretty bleak, and that campaign for nuclear disarmament, and we were right about the Cold War, but actually, it was quite a cool time. So as hard as it is, even today, when the world seems very bleak, just when you're young, just try and appreciate it as well. Try and appreciate the opportunities you have, and not always get drawn into the whole negativity because it's very easy,
Mm.
especially now,
Mm.
as it was then. I don't think it seems particularly bad now, but it seemed particularly bad then.
Yeah.
No generations had the
Yeah.
monopoly on shitty eras.
Yeah.
I
It's
think,
always seen as bad in the moment.
yeah, I mean, it seems to be a shitty era right now. And I don't know where our heroes are going to come from, whether you're left or right. I just don't see people that inspire me particularly much these days. But but it hasn't. But it's not always been perfect in the past as well. So yeah, just appreciate your youth when you've got it. Sounds awful, but yeah, that'd be my thing.
Good advice. Paul Woodadge, ladies and gentlemen. Paul, really appreciate this. And, there's so many other things I want to ask you, so many other things we could talk about. So I'd love to do a round two in the future. But you said you were working on the History Channel thing, but what are you currently working on now?
I have my YouTube channel. So I do 5 or 6 live streams minimum every week. None today. I had 2 yesterday, 2 tomorrow. So I'm at 1,800 of them in the last 45 years.
Congratulations.
I'm supposed to be writing a book. I've not been in the right headspace all this year. I've had a few things going on. My mum died in
Oh,
April. I've
sorry
got,
to hear that.
illness in my family, things like that. So
Mm.
not always been focused, but so I'm meant to be right. But I'm going to be get back to writing on that. I've got conferences to attend. I've got podcasts to record. I've got various other things I'm working at. I like to keep busy
Mm.
because then I don't notice the, the world collapsing around me if I'm busy. So yeah, I'm hoping Ipswich will get back in the Premier League again.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe not. Yeah, I just keep busy. So I'm always involved in World War II,
Mm.
really.
Awesome. And where could people go if they want to find your work? YouTube channel, anything else?
YouTube channel, World War II TV is web. I've got websites as well. There's one D-Day Historian, and there's World War II TV. But I'm easy to find. Just make sure you add the second D in my name. It's Woodadge, WOODADG, or World War II TV, and you'll find me on all sorts of podcasts and things like that. And but the YouTube is the best way to keep happy. But I one of the reasons I want to do this chat with you is my demographics. Apparently I have 0 people under 17 watching my channel.
Really?
Like 2%, 25. I mean, my age, the viewers who watch me are 50 to 80. They will die with me. Basically. I won't need to worry about what my channel is doing in 20 years' time, 30 years later, because I'll be dead. So the right audience. Because I'm talking about subjects for an hour and a half. That's that, and that, as I said earlier, the more detail you do, the smaller your market is.
Oh, for sure.
Because, and that doesn't matter whether it's cookery books or films or what. So when I tackle subjects we're in a big war crimes series at the moment, but I'm not going to be doing like a 30-minute thing about the Nuremberg trials. I'm going to be doing like 20 or so interviews with historians looking at war crimes trials, Soviet trials, Romanian, Norway trials in Norway, trials of specific individual Nazis. We did the IG Farben trials last week who were the manufacturers, or they were the conglomerate who owned the company that made the Zyklon B.
Oh, wow.
And what happened to those industrialists after war and those. So, it's about the detail for me, but that means people go, no, 1 hour and a half about that. No, give me 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Please give me the Cliff Notes version. But, I enjoy what I do. I enjoy talking to you. I enjoy it. As you can tell, I like rabbiting on about this stuff because I think it's fundamentally important.
Very important. And yeah, the more you talk about, Paul, the more I want to discuss. But yeah, we'll leave it for.
We can do it part.
Yeah, we'll leave it for another one. But yeah, no. In terms of demographics, I mean, I think YouTube does skew quite old and quite male. Especially even my demographics, way older than I am. I mean, I do get some young people as well, so I post a short form content. But if you want to target younger people, you'd have to turn your big episodes into little clips and put on TikTok. But
yeah, and I haven't got the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Even with the male female, when I'm now at, I think it's 6% women viewers, which sounds dreadful, but it used to be 1%.
Yeah.
I've actually increased it by 500%. And I strive to have 25% women guests. In a very military history is very male dominated. And don't get me started about the treatment women historians get, where they're judged on everything other than their history first. No one watches Anthony Beaver and is judging about, how his trousers are fitting around his package, so to speak.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what they're doing with women historians, even in 2025. And that makes me very upset.
Yeah.
Military history is moving out of the dark ages, but at a slightly slower pace than in other walks of life. My 2 stepdaughters are French, very, radical French girls. I tell them about the problems in the military, and they go, you haven't got out of the 1970s yet. I go, no, but we were in the 1950s. So, it's some baby steps, but that is something that is awful still about military history. The gatekeeping by the male white, mostly male, mostly white, middle-aged historians about letting the women come in, and if they do come into history, they must stay in their lane and only talk about Rosie the Riveter and SOE agents and female code breakers. It has not yet really become acceptable for a woman to just write a conventional military operational study, although it's beginning there. Alex Churchill Ring of Fire, her book about 1914, first of all, is brilliant. Lucy Betteridge Dyson's new book about the Arakan campaign, Commandos in Burma, is out in October. So that is a woman writing. I don't think there's any women in her book,
Mm.
her being a woman has nothing to do with the subject. Her grandfather happened to be a commando, but that's still quite new,
Yeah.
that women are writing about non-women subjects. Even the covers they get for their books tend to be kind of the ones that their books will go around like the table in the bookshop with women's history,
Really?
as opposed to their books being alongside Max Hastings and James Holland. So they don't even get the same treatment by the designers.
Mm.
But it's changing. It's changing, but not fast enough.
Yeah. Well, hopefully with social media and stuff, there might be some like female historians that post videos and podcasts like you do as well in the coming
It's happening.
future.
I mean, Alex Loxton on that is doing a lot of work there. So it is changing, but they're still dealing with the misogyny.
Mm.
I like to think, like the viewers of my channel who are good people, but the misogynists will die. They young people aren't that way. So sheer mortality will bring an end to that era, thankfully.
Mm.
But hopefully some of them will actually change their tune, these men, before they die. Hopefully they'll realize, hang on, am I being a misogynist? Why would I consider a book written by a woman worse, more likely to be wrong than a book written by a man? Why, when World War II was a war of everybody,
Mm.
it makes no sense to me.
Yeah.
But then anyway,
Yeah.
whatever.
Well, send me some names and email me some names. I'll try and get some female historians on the show. I'd be really
Yeah,
interested.
definitely. I'll send you. Yeah, but, I mean, definitely. Alex Churchill straight away. Right now, I'll put your way. I'll give you a list of names. No problem.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you so much, Paul.
Right.
Really appreciate this, and I'll let you know when the episode's out. And I'd love to around.
Yeah, and I'll push it on my things and whatever. I'll be happy to do it. So and thanks for the invite. I enjoyed it.
Awesome. If you've made it this far, you're likely not just a listener. You're ready to be the host. You felt that sense of intimacy and connection with our guest today, and you would like to get the same on your own show and start your own dream show. But you're worried about landing dream guests and all the complications and the mess that is often spoken about when starting your own podcast from scratch. You think starting a podcast requires a huge budget and a whole team, right? That is absolute nonsense. My pro remote podcast blueprint is the ultimate key to skipping the outdated advice and building a high quality, high impact show, even for under $100. It provides the proven strategies and AI templates that I use to this day that you will be able to use to reclaim your time and creative control. And this is a strictly limited opportunity. Don't dilly-dally because there's limited spaces. We've already got one student, Rob, who's joined. That means there's only a couple more spaces to get the Pro Remote Podcast Blueprint course half price. And you need to act very, very fast because this is a limited offer and you're very, very early. So if you want to get the early bird discount like Rob has and get the results by watching the course that goes through the exact step-by-step blueprint that I use to this day to create these episodes that you've just watched and get to the success and become Europe's fastest growing under 21 podcaster, and also join live weekly calls with me and use the AI templates and email templates that I use every single day to get the results and just get all my secrets without getting any of the mistakes and failures that I've made, then top link in the description is for you. And if you're ready to launch your own show and get personalized one-to-one help from me and copy my blueprint, which no other podcaster has shared, then I'll see you there. I'm rooting for you. Goodbye. Hope you enjoyed the episode too.